Expanding Capacity and Partnerships Through Authenticity and Trust, the Case of the Meta-Archive Cooperative. Remarks by Tyler Walters at the 159th ARL membership meeting. Convened by Carton Rogers.
Good afternoon. In case you wonder what room you've wandered into, let's make sure you're where you want to be. The title of our speaker's talk today is Expanding Capacity and Partnerships for Authenticity and Trust. If anybody needs to get up and go to another. I'm Carton Rogers. I'm the Vice Provost and Director of Libraries at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm currently the Chair of the Transforming Research Library Steering Committee and the host of this afternoon, convener of this afternoon's session. And I'm here to both convene and to introduce our speaker, Tyler Walters. There is a session description which you've probably seen, but let me go through it really quickly in case you haven't had a chance to read it. In the ARL report, New Roles for New Times, Digital Curation for Preservation, authors Tyler Walters and Catherine Skinner describe a promising set of new roles that libraries are currently carving out in the digital arena. They assert that the strongest future for research libraries is one in which multi-institutional collaborations achieve evolvable cyber infrastructures and services for digital curation. And they highlight collaborative approaches through a series of case studies of key programs and projects. Tyler will discuss how authentic leadership theory and trust development models have supported the cooperative's distributed digital partnership and its growing operational capacity. Tyler tells me that he's going to talk for half an hour or so, 35 minutes, leaving plenty of time for conversation, which we hope you'll all engage in. For those who don't know Tyler, he was appointed Dean of University Libraries at Virginia Tech in 2010. For those of you who are current fellows, take heart. Tyler was a fellow in the ARL program from 2008 and 2010. So you can see that this fast tracks you right into a deanship. He's a founding board member of the Educopia Institute, the management organization for the Meta-Archive Cooperative, and serves on the Meta-Archive Steering Committee. He's also the co-author of the 2011 ARL report, New Roles for New Times, Digital Curation for Preservation. Please welcome Tyler Walters.
Thank you, Carton. So I have a quick observation to make about this room. I got to tell you, I kind of cut my teeth presenting in Chicago at the Midwest Archives Conference many moons ago. There's a few people here who might remember that hotel, the Bismarck Hotel in Chicago. And it was a room a lot like this, but the posts, they had several posts in the middle of some of the speaking rooms, and they're all covered in mirrors. So as a speaker, you'd see about 4 of yourself when you're speaking. So at least here they have the mirrors behind you. And it was right next to the elevated train. So when you're talking, the room would start shaking. And the lights would shake, and everybody would look around. So anyway, this room kind of reminds me of that. It has that kind of feel to it. So I have to say, I've talked a little bit about trust development. That's what this is about. And it's not an easy thing to talk about. That's why I want to kind of get through some of the models and stuff that I want to kind of push in front of you. I'm going to give you 30 minutes of what trust and trust development is about, so you don't have to spend years reading the literature like I've been doing. But it's just something you do. You're either trustworthy or you're not very trustworthy. So it's just you kind of are. So again, it's kind of a hard thing to talk about, which I think the conversation at the end is really the most important part. But let me kind of go over some of this. And another little disclaimer I should say is that some of my work, this is really related to the PhD program that I'm involved in. There's a few folks here from Simmons College, some of the cohorts that have come before me. And this is kind of related to the research I'm doing in the managerial leadership and the information professions PhD program there on leadership and trust. So I thought this when I was asked to do this, I was pleased because I thought the topic for the ARL meeting theme this week was a very good one. It's really about expanding capacity for partnerships to manage and deliver digital collections. And of course, for me, I thought, this is about trust. I've worked in a few cooperatives, interinstitutionally, internationally, and have really seen these issues about trusting one another's intent, their ability to produce and the like as being core to it. When that kind of partnership doesn't work out well, it's usually because of the absence of trust. People start questioning each other's intent, what they're really doing. Do they care about what me, the partner, really needs out of this? They start getting too self-centered on matters. So there is a lot of research on what we call collaborative networks. And I took it from this fountain of knowledge, or, authentic and truthful knowledge, Wikipedia, wikipedia.org. This notion of collaborative networks are an association of autonomous entities collaborating to achieve common or compatible goals. And I think that describes a lot of us in the room here, a lot of ARL libraries and affiliated groups that we work with. So when we get down to brass tacks, what are we really looking to do when we build partnerships or collaborative networks? We're doing this to build organizational capacity. That's usually the motivator. We're trying to get something done that we can't do by ourselves. And why do we want more capacity? To improve and perform our processes, which support our services, but also to think and plan strategically so we can think in a larger sense than just who we are at our one institution. Again, when we build partnerships, we're able to leverage scarce resources. This is usually financial in terms of our human capacity to get things done. The groups that I've been involved in, I think, have really focused a lot on how we kind of share and grow expertise in what we're doing, especially around digital collections. In the last 10 years, this has been a new area for us. And I think we've all kind of realized there's a lot of questions and issues we're addressing that we just didn't know the answer to. And we're beginning, now we've been developing these answers and tools and approaches to go forward, which feeds into advancing technologies. That's another thing we do in partnerships. And then experimenting with new ideas. Flirting with new ideas makes more sense when you do have a few partners who have a little bit of skin in the game instead of just doing it by yourself and really sticking your neck out. Easier to innovate when you have partners. So the one example I'm going to talk about a little bit in this, I'm going to focus mostly on some of the models and get us to think of it before we start discussing these things. But I'm going to refer some to the Meta-Archive Cooperative, which is a group that I've been involved with from the beginning. For those of you who don't know a lot about it, the quick commercial is, this is actually a digital preservation consortium that came together under the Library of Congress's NDIP program, their digital preservation program, formed in 2004. It's now about 7 years old. It started with 6 institutional members. It now has 19. 2 of them are consortiums, so we're actually working with and servicing 42 institutions. Some of them are in Brazil, some of them are in Spain, some of them are in the UK. So it's gone international and rather complicated and complex, but it's all going very well. And this really began even in 2000, really focusing some of the work that came out of Emory University with some of its other partners in the South, and I was at Georgia Tech at the time. Virginia Tech was a partner in this, dealing with a project we called AmericanSouth.org, which was an attempt to really do a lot of metadata harvesting around digital collections that documented Southern culture and history. So the whole thing kind of morphed from that interest in gaining and collecting metadata into how do we preserve the actual digital resources that we have, which I think has even morphed a little bit more into just not just preservation, but how do we do collection management in the digital world. So I will use this occasionally as kind of my example as we go forward. So I've used this graphic before. I've actually got about 6 different trust and organizational network models that I'm going to try to hit on really quickly. I don't necessarily want to explain all of them. I don't want to bore you with too much academics here, but I want to point out a couple of aspects with each one of these because I think they're important. And I know as I've worked in these groups, a lot of people say, yeah, I know we got to be trustworthy, we got to tell the truth, we got to do what we say, and it's that kind of topic. But again, when cooperatives and partnerships don't work out, it's usually because one of these aspects hasn't been taken care of. So I do think it's worth thinking more about. I've kind of started with a pretty seminal study by Holland and Lockett not that long ago in 1998 that really looks at virtual organizations and at an international level as well, and how these things happen. And I think there's at least 2 major points here that I'd want you to think about that come out of this model. And one is this sense on the left that there's these trust antecedents. It's pretty rare when we actually get in the room for the first time and do some big collaboration together. Chances are we've had some interaction before that. And just like with the Meta-Archive I described, we actually worked on this AmericanSouth.org project, metadata harvesting, for about 4 years, which was pretty particular and smaller scale than what the Meta-Archive has become. But there's this sense about dispositional trust, as they call it, which is kind of the baggage that we all bring to the table. It's about our experiences, our attitudes, culture, even our personality things we bring to the table. And they have a series of hypotheses that they refer to in their publications. There's more than one. But I've always liked this hypothesis 4 about how can we work internationally, and it's a sense of that dispositional trust becomes less important as we have shared information systems that we can share between our organizations that really tell us about the performance of one another. So it's a little bit of this formalizing trust and being able to share information. I think as librarians, we should know that. We kind of expect that. But again, I think a lot in our consortiums, many times we fall short of really supplying a lot of performance information and data between ourselves. So it's something to keep in mind. Other one to mention is this. This is actually my favorite one. It's by 3 guys named Maester, Green, and Galford. It's a book called The Trusted Advisor. Now I got to tell you, this particular theory or model is really causing me a lot of problems in my work at Simmons College because it's not a scholarly item. My professors say, well, this isn't scholarly. No, this is 3 guys who were a bunch of ad agency dudes at Digitas marketing company, and they basically are paid advisors, these 3. And I don't think any of them are there anymore, but they spent a lot of time really researching and writing and thinking about their experiences as advisors on marketing to major companies, and how you do advertising and marketing in the digital world. And they came up with this notion of being the trusted advisor. And I really kind of recommend it. After many, many years, probably the last 5-6 years of reading in this area, I still come back to this one book. So it's not very scholarly, but I like what they've come up with. And they have some experience or some explanations, such as these quotes here: trust results from accumulated experiences over time. You can't get away from that. It's hard to just form a new group of people and come together and say, we're going to trust one another. Well, based on what? And they also talk about institutional trust as human qualities. And this is something I don't see a lot in the literature. That they actually refer to it a lot as a marriage, everything you know in your personal life about how to treat people well and how to have a partner and do the right things. And they talk a lot about emotional processes between institutions as well as rational processes. So I'll get into that a little bit. But they have these values. I could go to their formula here. They are a bit formulaic, but I like these values that they have. They talk about credibility. These are things that we know you got to bring to the table. You got to engage partners in the beginning who are credible. Can they deliver? Reliability. Can they deliver? Have they delivered in the past on other projects? Can you find out what they've done with other partners? The sense of intimacy. Now, it's not what you're thinking, but there is this notion that they provide of a business intimacy, and that is just this level of emotional comfort that people have. Their whole theory is institutions don't trust institutions. People trust people, period, in a sense. Again, I think it's something we know, but it's something that I don't think we always think about in the forefront of our mind when we're working in our collaborations. So there's that sense of emotional comfort that we can say and do things. And when you have that emotional comfort and you trust somebody, then you're able to talk about the really tough stuff. And again, when organizations aren't going well, it's usually because you can't have a conversation that you need to have, because you just don't have that sense of intimacy or emotional comfort. And of course, they divide that all over self-orientation. How self-oriented are you? And this is where this whole theme of empathy, I think, and trust becomes a huge deal. It's all about thinking about your partners. And I would posit that we, as research libraries, are going to do a lot more of that. Clearly, we can't forget who we are, and that we're trying to take care of our library and our institution. We have to do that. But I think what's going to happen over time, and it is happening now, that our own institutional cultures end up taking on this aspect that of valuing that we deliver for our partners, and that becomes foremost. And I think that's actually happened through the MetaArchive Cooperative. So something else I've kind of picked up from something called authentic leadership theory. I've written an entire paper on this. Authentic leadership theory. There's quite a bit out there now. Rather new, and I find it interesting that all these writings about authentic leadership really kind of blossomed between 2003 and 2007, right before the banking, the panic of 2008. And I think we can call it a panic. I was actually in the UK at the time talking about digital preservation, and I was using a model for digital preservation federations, and I was talking about our Federal Reserve model in the US, and it was literally 1 week after the banking crisis really happened here at the end of September 2008. So everybody, all the Brits got a good laugh out of that. They said, we're going to really test that system, what's going to happen. But it fits back with this whole sense of authentic leadership. And what do we do as leaders? That we need to be self-aware, we need to be aware of kind of what we bring to the table, our own thoughts and ideas and baggage and experiences from our past. We need to have transparency in our work relationships, which also kind of feeds in with what they call balanced information processing, that we gather information from the people that we work with. We don't just make decisions on our own without involving our partners and getting information from them. And then that whole sense of reasoning, how do we process and think these things through? Moral, ethical being really those stories and experiences behind us that help us process what we're hearing. So it's those screens and filters that we all have when we take in information, and we kind of put these things into a perspective that makes sense to us based on our own life experience. And this is what's been put together by Luthans and Abolio in 2003. There's also a book called True North, Finding the Authentic Self by Bill George of 2003. And it's a lighter read, and although he's a professor at Harvard Business School, but he really talks about life stories and how life stories really inform who you are and your approach to leadership. And I think my whole twist to it is that how you present yourself and how you if you try to behave authentically, that facilitates trust. The absence of that, you're not going to have trust. And I think we've all been in meetings with people where we start questioning people's intent. What are they going to do? Do they really have my interests at heart? Do I really want to work with these people? And if you start asking yourself those questions, you're on that slippery slope, and you're probably not going to want to partner with these people. But chances are we do, which ends up being a bad project. So it's easier for me to find failed projects than I'm talking about. That's what I expect my research to kind of take me that way. So this goes back to Maester, Green, and Galford and kind of their trust development process, which I still think is about the best one, how to kind of behave in these interinstitutional organizations when we're trying to build partnerships. Is engage, listen, frame, envision, and commit. And I think the real step is that one in the middle, that framing. And they talk again about empathy, about putting yourself in the shoes of your partners. What do you need to do here? And for them, framing is this issue of crystallizing and clarifying the issues involved. And that I would be doing that for you. I would be speaking and doing that for you as my partners. So I'm showing that I understand what your needs are, what your issues are. Now, who's taking care of my needs? Am I thinking about those? Well, sure, but I'm hoping my partners are going to think about those even more so and verbalize those things and take care of me. And that's how these kinds of things work in the end. So again, good book, not scholarly. So it'll be interesting. Network theories. There's a lot of models for social networks out there, and I've got two that I want to kind of throw out real quick. There's this group out at University of Arizona, Millward and Provan, and there's another one, Millward and Kennis is another publication. They deal with management aspects to collaborative networks, and I think of it as this kind of trust but verify. It's the sense of formalizing trust, all that I've been talking kind of about the squishy, gooey, human stuff that we have to do when we collaborate. These guys really assert, how do you verify these things, and how do you try to formalize them? And I think they have these 5 items that I think would help any of us when we're building partnerships and collaborative networks. How do we do accountability? How do we assign responsibility and tasks and hold each other accountable? Legitimacy. How do you assure your members of your reputation and value? Well, that goes back to the other guys, Maester, Green, and Galford, and their sense of credibility. I think there's a lot of overlap between these theories, although I'm pretty sure they don't talk to one another. But that legitimacy is very much like credibility. Conflict, you have to work out in advance. How do you handle disputes and issues of authority? Who's really in charge? And commitment, which is also like the Maester, Green, and Galford piece of commit. And to think about what are those carrots, what are the inducements and enticements to get people to commit and follow a certain path together. And then, of course, designing that whole organization. How distributed, how decentralized, how centralized might it be? And they have some writings on those kinds of models. They have a participative model, which really has no core to it. They have a kind of what they call a network administrative model that's kind of lightweight in the middle, with a little bit of staff, a little bit of resources. That kind of resembles the meta-archive cooperative. And then they have one that's kind of a lead institution, where there's just one big institution in the middle that kind of leads a lot of things. And I think we see a lot of that in our field, but I think we're starting to see more of the network administrative types, as opposed to the kind of the big lead institution that sits in the middle. So the other model I wanted to mention is this organizational networks. This is kind of about learning and knowledge, and it's from somebody who's Karen Stevenson is her name. She seems to come and go. I haven't actually seen her publish anything for a while, maybe 3 years or so. Self-described as a corporate anthropologist. She has a background in sociology and urban anthropology. And she's kind of come up with these networks within an organization, and I think they work inter-organizationally as well. And I can just quickly describe each one of these 6 that she has. So her whole theory is we all go out in organizations and we learn things, we get information, and we all have networks of people, within our organization and our lives that we get them from. So she has these 6. The work network is just simply, who do you talk to during the day to find out about things going on at work? Social network is a little broader than that. Who do you talk to find out about things at work, life, what's happening in the news? You kind of have a social network, people you just chit-chat with about kind of what's going on in the world. The innovation network, who do you go to and collaborate with and talk to around new ideas? When you start thinking about new ideas, who do you go to? Another network, and she talks about these as being discrete and distinct from one another. An expert knowledge network, who do you go to who has expertise and skill when you're trying to do something new? Strategic network, again, is there's a group of people you tend to go to when you want to talk about the future. Where is everything headed? What's the future about? That's your strategic network. And learning network is about improving processes and services. How do you learn? Who do you go to when you're dealing with process improvement? So, we know we should collaborate, but how should we do it? So I'm giving you a few very quick, high-level look at some models, trying to save you a couple years of reading. I'm not going to talk a lot about how we do it, but I'm going to kind of talk about those models, I think, and how they've played out, at least with the MedArchive Cooperative. Give you one example. Then I like to be quiet and listen to some of you, and let's talk a bit about some of your own thoughts and experiences with this. Again, the MedArchive is now 46 institutions covering 12 states, 4 countries. We have a network of about, and this is growing all the time, it's around 300 terabytes with 24 dedicated servers on the network. It provides consulting training to members as well as outside the membership, and really has plans to double its membership soon, next 3, 4, 5 years or so. It continues to grow, and I think it's going to grow rapidly. So again, it's been a very interesting case study for those of us who've been involved from the first day to just kind of watch these trust development dynamics and see how this goes on, especially as we start taking on partners who aren't original, partners who are overseas, and see how all these differences play out. So some of these things, so I mentioned this earlier, this aspect of dispositional trust, I think that's a very important thing. When you sit down and you start working with and collaborating with people, we all, I think, instinctively think about who do we know already, who can we work with and talk to. And for us, it was this AmericanSouth.org project that really began 4 years earlier and had kind of ended. It was kind of like, now what? What do we do with this content that we know about? These other points of like credibility and reliability, these are the functional aspects to it, but I think it helped us a lot starting out as a partnership with the ENDIT program at Library of Congress. Honestly, one of our motivators to remain reliable was our own cooperative agreement or contract with the Library of Congress. And if we screwed that up, we'd be in trouble. And it took us 9 months to negotiate that contract after the award came in. So that was a big, that was a big project. I'm sure I got a few gray hairs. That's probably my mustache. It probably explains what happened there. The MedArchive Cooperative Agreement itself, we created in 2007. So we really started moving to kind of formalizing the trust that had been going on for 3-4 years in terms of working together, which is an important part. And we moved away from being kind of the one lead institution model with Emory at our center, with Emory's blessing, and created the Educopia Institute, which has its own board. There are other people involved in that board beyond our membership who help look at and manage and use them as a sounding board for the things that the MedArchive Cooperative does. So it's a way of getting even more people involved who are not necessarily directly members. David Siemens here in the back, and he's one of our board members. So intimacy and empathy. So this is again kind of the sticky, gooey human stuff. What are we going to do in these areas? I think it made a lot of sense for us as we worked early on. We just had a lot of in-person meetings, and we sat across the table and we talked about the issues. We talked about the collections we cared about and how to preserve these things, how to manage them over time, and just listen to one another as we clarify those issues. So it's back to that trust development process that Maester Green and Galford had put out, and I realized that we really were doing that, even though we didn't plan it. And I think that's kind of one of my points of having this discussion today is, let's be a little more intentional and let's plan and think about these things. What are these processes that we need to have, and how do we develop trust? Although I think we winged it, but we did these things. And I think in the end we gained a lot of comfort with one another on how we're going to do this. And I think today the group really has its own culture where we care about our employing institutions, very much so, but we realize to do that we really have to move as a group to realize things and to have things done. So there really is a culture there of its own. Transparency, I'd see transparency or relational transparency in the authentic leadership theory work. What's that about? It's about gaining intimacy. It's about gaining that sense of emotional comfort and that you can trust people's intentions. What are they going to do? Or is it just all about me? So with our group, we've done a lot of business actions around the open. We still, after all these years, we still have a weekly phone call, Tuesday at 3 o'clock, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We all used to be on the East Coast, so we have to remember that we're not all on the East Coast anymore. Committees and work groups that have formed together. We have wikis and websites that have an awful lot of detail on there. We have what we call the MetaWiki, MetaArchive MetaWiki. It has all of our technical documentation on there. Some of it's open to the public, not all of it, but most of it. Prospective members can see, 100% of it. I'd say maybe 80-90% of it is actually out in the open. So these are the kinds of things that I think help build transparency. What are we doing? Well, we wrote it up and we put it out there. And itself, too, is this distributed network. It's not just an IT network. It's a network, a distributed network and partnership of people and institutions with very little center. There's currently 2.5 FTE employed with the group, so it's stayed very lightweight, which really means the bulwark is the partners and the partnerships and who's doing that, as opposed to seeing some middle group that takes care of it. Then we have to worry about the middle group. What are they doing? Are they really telling us everything that's going on? There's very little middle group to this. And there too, I think we're seeing more of that kind of development going on in our field around digital collections and preservation. So a couple other quick items to mention here. Empathy and self-awareness. It really is about empathy. It's about putting yourself in your partner's shoes and really thoroughly understanding their needs, their dilemmas, their shortcomings, their great things they bring to the table, all the above, and really understanding what that's about. And I think if partners sense that you're not focusing on them, that's when we start questioning each other's intentions. And I think it's that little mental process that we do in the back of our heads that sows the seeds to breaking partnerships, or at least rendering them rather ineffective. And then that kind of the companion of awareness and reasoning that Bill George talks about with authentic leadership. It's that stories behind there, what you wanted to do. And I think for us, a lot of it was this, we were committed to ensuring access to digital collections, but when we got involved with the NDIP program and formed that new partnership and got funded by them initially, we wanted to not just cooperate, we wanted to form a cooperative. We knew we had a chance to do something brand new, and we knew that we had a chance to really steward our libraries through change. It would really change in the end who they were, because we'd be managing a significant body of digital collections. So I think we knew we'd been in this moment of time, and that was really kind of our story, that we wanted to do this. And now we have the opportunity. So the last thing I wanted to mention is just kind of go back to Karen Jefferson's social network theory. And I don't know, you can't really see it, they're too faint. There are lines. I'll probably have to tell you some of these are lines between these things. So my earlier slide was kind of all the black text and why we build organizational capacity and with her networks. But I think, again, things that we innately see that we need to do with organizational capacity building, they map to her network theory. So I think reading her work and looking at her case studies can help inform the things we do. So for instance, when we're trying to think and plan strategically together, that's a strategy network. If we're trying to improve our processes and services, that's a learning network. Experimenting with new ideas is the innovation network that she talks about and the like. So I think there's a lot to kind of get from a lot of these network and trust models that are out there and to apply to what we're doing. So with that,
thank you for listening. Music was provided by Josh Woodward. For more talks from this meeting, please visit www.arl.org.